Say you were to go ahead and ask the question, what defines Hunter x Hunter in the fall of 1999, not long before the premiere of its first major anime adaptation? I imagine it'd be something along the lines of this. Hunter x Hunter is defined by a clearly JRPG-inspired tone, creative locales, and lovely, over-the-top yet engaging character writing. It's similar to mangaka Yoshihiro Togashi's prior major work Yu Yu Hakusho in its focus on character writing and character-driven storytelling, but its presentation of the world and tone are very different. Hakusho mixed action with elements of mystery, thriller, and especially horror to help it stand out. But Hunter x Hunter appears to be moving in the opposite direction, with more fantastical world-building, characters and scenarios, showing glimpses of the darker elements of Hakusho, but never leaning very far in that direction. Early Hunter x Hunter existed in very stark contrast to the elements the series is known for today. As I write this, Hunter x Hunter is knees deep in the multi-perspective, complex, politically driven succession contest storyline, where there are leagues upon leagues of factions and characters with their own motivations, storylines, powers, and strategies, all making moves at the exact same time, a far cry from the more simplistic, straightforward stories seen from Hunter x Hunter by late 99. Hunter x Hunter has been defined by this style of storytelling for quite some time. At least since the late 2000s has Hunter x Hunter been known for its ability to tell insanely intricate and incredibly deep story arcs. So that raises the question, what exactly happened to Hunter x Hunter in that single decade of time? The answer is pretty simple. Yorknew City happened. A storyline that, 26 years removed from its debut in Weekly Shonen Jump, maintains a position as one of the most beloved arcs Hunter x Hunter ever produced, lauded for introducing more intricate, thematically deep storytelling to Hunter x Hunter, and to this day is continuously discussed and dissected by the Hunter x Hunter community. It's an arc that set the stage for the much larger story-driven material to come afterwards, but what exactly did Yorknew City do to change the landscape of manga? So much so that it remains one of shonen's most popular story arcs. Yorknew City is the fourth major storyline of Hunter x Hunter, and in a very bold and surprising twist, primarily follows Kurapika, who previously had been a major character but certainly not the protagonist, the way he essentially is in this storyline, though by all means he isn't the sole focus of this arc, a complicated reality I will explain soon. Essentially, this arc continues a briefly mentioned background plotline that had been built up from the beginning of Hunter x Hunter. Firstly, Kurapika's stated goal of getting revenge on those responsible for the genocide of his clan, the Kurtas, an action committed at the hands of an organization known as the Phantom Troop, or the Spider. Secondly, towards the end of the Hunter exams, Kurapika was made aware that there was a chance the Phantom Troop would be gathering in a city known as Yorknew on September 1st. So after the situation regarding Killua is all wrapped up, the main quartet of Gon, Killua, Leorio, and Kurapika decide to mostly go their separate ways in the meanwhile before reconvening on Yorknew on the 1st of September. That all being said, this arc follows the ensuing conflict between Kurapika, who joins the Mafia as a bodyguard in order to get involved in an enormous Mafia-led auction, and the Phantom Troop, who have plans to raid said auction for all of its loot. So let's get one thing out of the way right now. The thing that most obviously sets this arc apart from everything that came before it is its tone. This arc is commonly described as dark, and that is certainly not untrue, but it's also a very vague way to express what this arc does to make itself appear that way. For many, when they describe this arc as dark, they mean it's more brutal, violent, that it tackles much darker material, and that is also true, but also not the entire picture. Mind you, Hunter x Hunter wasn't exactly a whimsical series to begin with. Surely it wasn't dark, but it was never afraid to shy away from the dark scenarios and, especially in the manga, graphic violence. The primary reason Yorknew feels so tonally at odds with what came before is a result of its presentation. As I indicated earlier in this video, pre-Yorknew Hunter x Hunter was best defined by its PlayStation JRPG-inspired vibes. The fantastical locations, where no matter how far in the direction of realism they leaned, they still leaned back into this area of unreality, or the over-exaggerated characters, such as the bizarre clown-faced magician with a fighting fetish, Hisoka, or, other characters like the Zoldyck family, Satos, many of the Hunter examinees, among many others that I don't feel like naming right now because I'm too lazy. The most normal character in the story was Leorio, and that became a bit of a joke in itself, that he was an ordinary guy in a world full of exaggerated, overpowered characters. They weren't necessarily unrealistic, but they definitely felt like they'd be very at home in a game like Dragon Quest, a clear influence of Togashi's, which you should all play by the way, because Dragon Quest is peak. Yorknew City, however, has a completely different vibe. Sure, it maintains the tradition of highly exaggerated characters from the prior arcs, but they're painted against the backdrop of Yorknew City, a very obvious analog to New York City, so much so that in the 1999 anime, the city's backgrounds are very often just paintings of the 90s New York skyline. To be fair, Yorknew isn't just New York but in Hunter x Hunter, it's more of a mishmash of different types of cities. There's a segment with more ancient European-styled architecture, and another that is a complete wasteland close to the desert. But for the most part, it takes its role as being this world's New York very seriously. Yorknew is not nearly as fantastical as any of the locations that came before, and the contrast between this realistic setting and the characters inhabiting it are very striking. It's not even just the setting though. The main cast, which we follow, are very exaggerated and fantastical, but much of the side characters are, similar to the city, presented in a more realistic way. As I said much earlier, this arc follows Kurapika's dealings with the Mafia, and unlike the hyper-stylized Mafia in, say, JoJo, Hunter x Hunter's Mafia is presented as close to realistic as you can get in the world of Hunter x Hunter. All of this helps paint a vivid, more grounded and grimy background for this arc, something further punctuated in the original anime adaptation. The very first Yorknew episode features Kurapika arriving at his new place of employment to a classical piano piece, and the episode ends with a test fight for the bodyguards, with Chopin acting as background music for the moment Kurapika reveals his new chain nen ability. Meanwhile, the more adventurous-sounding music of the prior arcs is replaced with plenty of jazz-sounding tracks for Yorknew. I will be using 1999 footage for much of this video because despite 2011 being a very good adaptation, I do think 1989 better understood the tone of this arc, and why that was important. Because this arc is meant to feel very different from what came before, something I think the older anime got across much better. That being said, I feel singling out the tone of the arc is a very surface level way of expressing why this arc feels so distinct, and why it represented a huge change for Hunter x Hunter, because more than its sudden willingness to tackle darker material and ground itself near to reality is its manner of presenting the story all of those elements are built around. As I said earlier, this arc sees the mantle of main protagonist get shifted over to Kurapika. A very abrupt shift, might I add. Something like this isn't unheard of for Battle Shounen manga, like how in Naruto Part 2 there's a decent chunk of time focused around Sasuke Uchiha. But in Naruto, Sasuke always felt more integral and important to the plotline as a deuteragonist, compared to Kurapika's role in Hunter x Hunter, despite Pika being one of the main four characters. To be fair though, while he wasn't quite Sasuke levels of importance despite being one of the main characters, he was incredibly popular at this time. Kurapika would end up scoring 10,000 more points than Gon in the first popularity poll, just barely losing to Killua to earn himself the distinction of being Hunter x Hunter's second most popular character. I want to add, something I find interesting about Yorknew is that Kurapika is portrayed very differently in this arc compared to what came before. Kurapika always had a dark edge to his character, one that was perfectly suited for the darker narrative of Yorknew, and why I imagine he was singled out as the protagonist of this arc. However, the Hunter exams in the Zoldyck family arcs had made it a point to downplay his tragic past, trauma, and thirst for vengeance as a way to show that despite all of the stuff he had been through, he was still, and more than capable in fact, of being playful, laid back, and caring. That despite expressing in his first appearance that his only fear was that his anger would fade, his heart had not been entirely consumed by rage. Togashi, without having to spell it out and slap us across the face with it, made it very clear that Kurapika, at heart, was a kid who longed for connection above anything, including the vengeance he claimed to want more than anything in the world. While the end of the Zoldyck family storyline implied that Kurapika, Leorio, Gon, and Killua would continue adventuring together come their reunion in Yorknew City, this arc mostly sees Kurapika away from those bonds he formed, and this results in us seeing a new angle to his character. We get to see what happens when Kurapika is allowed to believe that his vengeance supersedes his desire for family. It goes without saying, but as a result, we find ourselves faced with a very different Kurapika. Instead of the soft-looking, analytical goofball with a tragic past but a big heart, we get a standoffish, more cold take on the character. One who's so knees-deep in this quest for vengeance that when his friends actually start to get involved, he actively tells them to fuck off and leave him alone, in stark contrast to what he would have done before. Moving aside, Yorknew begins a bit of a formula. On that note, what exactly is the Yorknew City formula? Well, give me a moment. I've neglected to bring this other discussion point up in my script, and I can't imagine there being a better time than now, but trust me, it's connected. In my prior Hunter x Hunter video, I discussed the difference between character-driven and narrative-driven stories. I imagine that a character-driven narrative is a narrative focused around more straightforward, simple plot lines that are used as vehicles for character interactions. Character interactions that is used to further engage us with the characters of the story. By contrast, a more narrative-driven plotline has much more moving parts. The plot is moving much more dynamically than it would be if it was mostly focused on just the characters' interactions. To give you an example to further explain what I mean, let's take a look at Togashi's prior major shonen hit, Yu Yu Hakusho. One of its most beloved arcs is its dark tournament storyline. Much of its structure involves the main characters dealing with the different conflicts each round of the tournament brings, and how each participant individually deals with these issues, with their character personalities shining through in the way they approach combat. The story makes it abundantly clear that Kuwabara is a bumbling but lovable underdog due to his inability to keep up with his teammates and competitors, but ability to always get back up no matter what. Or Hiei's cold aggression through his preference for quick, fast-paced, decisive, fuck you, I win fights. But by contrast, the following storyline, the Chapter Black arc, is more focused on its overarching storyline and the ways the Sensui squad are forcing Yusuke and his allies into precarious positions. Character writing very obviously still exists, but it's not the main focus. You don't get as many superfluous character moments like in the Dark Tournament in this arc. If the focus is anywhere, it's getting through the ever-evolving situation this arc provides. In my prior Hunter x Hunter video, I established that the Hunter exams was character-driven due to its focus on exams that allowed much space for character banter, while Yorknew, due to its more complex plotline, was story-driven. A huge part as to why it's so complex is a result of the arc being told through 3 different perspectives, and it's on that note I finally bring us back around to what I said earlier about the supposed Yorknew City formula. Told you it was connected. Yorknew City started a trend amongst these major story arcs in Hunter x Hunter, one which was carried on into Chimera Ants and the Succession Contest. All 3 are stories that follow different perspectives on the same series of events, treating just about every point of view with almost equal amounts of importance. This is by far the calling card of that formula, and I'd like to note that each arc has gradually increased the amount of perspectives we follow. I kinda like how straightforwardly Yorknew does it though, proving that less is often more. When it comes to point of views in this arc, each follows a certain set of characters. One focuses on Kurapika and his dealings with the Mafia, another one focuses on Gon, Killua, and Leorio as they try to make enough money to get their hands on the video game known as Greed Island, which Gon suspects will lead him to his father. And there's another focusing on this arc's main antagonist, the Phantom Troop, the ones responsible for much of this arc's events, and the target of Kurapika's vengeance as they're the ones responsible for killing his family. Each of their stories are happening at the exact same time and initially play off in parallel, not intersecting much at all, but once the Phantom Troop begins making their moves, their actions cause a cascading domino effect that leads Kurapika to involve themselves in their actions, and later those actions inadvertently bring Gon and Killua into the crosshairs of the troop. By the end of the arc, all 3 storylines are effortlessly blended together. Switching perspectives wasn't something new to Hunter x Hunter, but more often than not, it was used to contextualize the situations the main characters would find themselves in, like giving us an idea why the Hunter examinees would make the decisions they do, or showing us their perspective of those doofuses from Heaven's Arena. But Togashi goes all in on fleshing these perspectives out in Yorknew City, turning them into parallel stories that run alongside the main plot, and it truly adds to that sense of scale and adds more interesting layers to this conflict. For example, it gives an opportunity to humanize the antagonists of this arc, the Troop. I have neglected to give any sort of summary for this arc. My apologies, let me do that now. Yorknew City primarily follows Kurapika Kurta, taking over as acting protagonist in the place of Gon, and focuses on Kurapika's escapades as a bodyguard for a mafia boss's daughter, a job he took after being made aware that the Phantom Troop, the ones responsible for the genocide of his clan, will be at a huge mafia-run auction in Yorknew City. Because of that, it's no surprise that Kurapika ends up crossing paths with the aforementioned Troop who intend to rob the auction. As I mentioned not too long ago, much of this arc is actually told from the Troop's point of view, and despite very clearly being the bad guys, we end up finding that they're actually a little more nuanced than expected. In the past, Kurapika portrayed them as a force of nature, indicating, especially in the first anime adaptation, that they were some sort of organization on a wider scale, only for us to learn that they're really just some dudes. They're clearly not good guys, but Togashi excellently uses his character writing chops to show us a number of things. That they're not simply stone cold killing assholes. They mess around with each other, look out for each other, and many are willing to die for each other. The group has a code which demands that they avoid direct confrontation with other members and instead settle their debates with coin tosses. In many cases, the specific members have very specific dynamics. Nobunaga and Uvogen being the best of bros, which later leads Nobunaga to try to get Gon to join the group because Gon reminds him of Uvo. Phaeton, despite being pretty serious, often messes around with Finks. Franklin always looking out for Shizuku, Machi being the one who has to rein Hisoka in, whatever's going on between Shalnark and Uvo. How when he's being tortured by Kurapika, Uvo refuses to give any information at all about the troop to Kurapika, because he doesn't want to sell it as friends, even if that means he's going to die. Their dynamics add considerable weight to their characters, making sure they're not just some bad guys for the main characters to take out. Not only that, but I imagine for many, it endears us to them as people, making it much easier to like them despite their uncomfortably high body count, and making Kurapika's thirst for their blood a much harder pill to stomach. By all means, Kurapika is more than justified in taking his anger out on those responsible for killing his family, but despite being very clearly the bad guys, it's easy to become attached to them due to their very human, found family dynamic. And this only gets more complicated when Kurapika finally bares his fangs and ensnares one of the troop members into a trap before mercilessly killing him. So the auction is about to go ahead as planned, but right as everything is about to get started, the Phantom Troop make their move, kill all the people in the building and prepare to loot the place, only to find the vault holding it all was completely empty. They flee the scene, but find themselves surrounded by Mafia goons who sick their best Nen users onto them. But the troops completely unfazed by these circumstances and begin playing cards, while Uvo fights the Mafia Nen users, and despite them being hyped up as far above the strength of anybody willing to mess around with the Mafia, and despite each giving him a bit of trouble, Uvo packs almost all of them up single-handedly without breaking much of a sweat. But this victory is immediately followed by Kurapika capturing Uvogen using his new Chain Nen ability. I don't feel like going over how it works because that's not really what I'm here to explain today, but basically it has many functions: offensive, defensive, healing, and binding, among many others I might have forgotten about. It's also stronger on troop members as a result of Kurapika's Nen vow, which I don't feel like explaining either. And while Uvo is able to later escape captivity, he's so pissed about the situation he decides to run it back with Kurapika, which leads to this showdown. I really love the fight that ensues. Visually, it's stunning. Art, animation, direction, music, all of it comes together perfectly. But I also really love how this fight just completely subverts, or better yet, flips the table on the audience's expectations for what this fight will bring. This is the very first face-to-face confrontation between Kurapika and any of the troop members, the people who had his family killed. You'd expect us to be looking at a highly emotional, large-scale fight between these two powerhouses. I mean, after all, was that not why Uvo was shown absolutely demolishing the Mafia's hyped up Nen users? As a means of showing us just how powerful Uvogen was? And meanwhile, Kurapika has similarly been hyped up, his abilities and confidence making it clear he's more than ready for anything that can be dished at him. So I repeat that going into this fight, I imagine audiences were expecting either an evenly matched conflict where Kurapika needs to win using his brains and various tools versus Uvo's raw power, or an emotional bout where Kurapika has to overcome Uvogen's strength, which proves far greater than he was anticipating, something like a longer version of Sasuke's first confrontation with Itachi in Naruto. But what we get instead is a completely one-sided, calculated, cold beatdown where Uvo throws everything he has at Kurapika, but Kurapika is so many leagues stronger and smarter that in reality, defeat was never even a possibility for him in the first place. This being why he infamously brought a shovel to the fight. Kurapika had intentionally led Uvo into this battle hoping to test his newfound Nen ability against the troop's strongest member as a way of gauging how far he could push his new skill set while also getting information on the other troop members. But once Uvo makes it very clear that he won't sell his friends out, Kurapika simply murders him on the spot. The strongest member of the troop dead, just like that. And it's at that moment it becomes abundantly clear that This isn't like the Hunter exams or the Zoldyck family arc or Heaven's Arena. And no, I don't mean that it's darker. I mean that the mission of this arc becomes a bit ambiguous. The Hunter exams were about Gon trying to pass the titular test. The Zoldyck family arc was about 3/4 of the main quartet trying to get to Killua and get him away from his family. Heaven's Arena was about Gon trying to run it back against Hisoka. Going into this arc, it's easy to get the impression Yorknew was about Kurapika finally getting his revenge on those who killed his family, but this arc isn't about that. In very stark contrast to everything that came before this arc and pretty much a lot of Battle Shounen stories, Yorknew as an arc is very ambiguous about what its main goal is. Because after this moment, defeating the troop, despite being something Kurapika could do so easily that it's pretty much a matter of time now, it's not what this arc is about. But in that case, what is it about? I'm gonna be real, I kinda don't know. But if I had to imagine, if I had to throw something out there, I'd say this arc isn't about the fight against the troop, but instead the fight for Kurapika's very soul. That's where Gon, Killua, and Leorio come in, the third perspective of the story. These three, for the most part, had been doing their own thing for much of the arc while the major stuff between Kurapika and the troop were happening. As I mentioned earlier, Gon and Killua are actually in town looking to make money in order to bid on a game known as Greed Island, which both suspect might lead them to Gon's dad. This leads to and later Leorio to begin working on several get-quick-rich schemes in order to get the billions of dollars they'd need to bid on the game. One of these schemes getting them the attention of the Mafia, who make them aware that there's a huge prize pool for anyone who can successfully capture or kill one of the troop members after their auction raid. One thing leads to another, and before long, Gon and Killua have been captured by the Phantom Troop and are made aware that Kurapika has been hot on their trail and has even killed one of their own. Despite the fact that Gon and Killua's role initially comes across as entirely unrelated to the main plotline, we soon find that they, alongside Leorio, are the heart and soul of this narrative, because they represent what Kurapika has been missing since his clan was wiped out. If this arc is about anything, then perhaps it's about camaraderie. Killua's desperation to keep Gon protected when they're being held captive by the troop. In contrast, the troop committing a massacre on the Mafia, partially out of revenge but primarily out of grief at the loss of Uvo. Meanwhile, Kurapika distances and isolates himself from that same stuff during this arc. He does form working relationships with his fellow bodyguards, but they're much more formal, and these relationships are treated as a means to an end. They're there to get the job done. It's to a point where, when many of his co-workers are gunned down during the initial attack on the auction, Kurapika is upset, but he's not terribly sad about the whole thing. The only person who he forms any sort of actual bond with on the job is with Melody, but that's only really because she forces that onto him by always getting in his business, and the thing is, he never tries to push her away once she starts. It's as if, at heart, he's willing to let people in, even if he feels he shouldn't. Like he's afraid of what he might become when he lets connections and friendships get in the way of revenge. That he'll revert to who he became during the Hunter exams. He won't be the cold, calculated killer he'll need to be when the time comes. He runs away from the reality that, at heart, that's who he is. And he ignores the fact that, because he pushes everyone away, once his business is all good and done, he probably won't even be happy, with his family still dead and all. We see a different side to Kurapika, one who spent months away from friends, only focused on revenge, and how he, in many ways, regresses for the sake of revenge, a position which proves untenable when, towards the end of the second act of the arc, all the Phantom Troop members fake their deaths, leaving Kurapika destitute, believing all the work he put into taking them down was all for nothing, only to regain the light in his eyes when Gon and the rest invite him to a picnic in Central Park. And just their presence is enough to lift his spirits, and in an instant, the stone-faced, calculated, distant Kurapika returns to his pre-Yorknew personality. But, as I said earlier, the corpses the Mafia found that were supposed to prove the troop members all died, those were fake. So, during the third act, it ends up being that Kurapika who ends up having to face the troop. Not the cold-blooded Avenger, but the good-hearted friend. Ironically, the troop parallels Kurapika's desire as well. Kurapika, Gon, Killua, and Leorio hatch a plan that results in the capture of the troop's leader, Krollo, but Krollo is cool-headed and chill about the whole thing, because even if Kurapika plans to kill him, it's not like that'll do anything. The troop will survive without him, that was always the idea. The head's killed, but the spider survives. Except, the troupe isn't itself so sure if they're willing to let that happen. Because Gon and Killua were captured, a hostage exchange is put in place, with Chrollo expecting it not to go through and to die while the rest take care of Kurapika for him. Except, at the behest of member Pakunoda, who leads the negotiations, they instead go through with the exchange because Chrollo is too important to them, important to her, and important to her idealized vision of the Phantom Troop. So if this arc is about anything, it's not about Kurapika fighting and beating the troupe. That never happens, even if Kurapika wanted it. He has the opportunity to take out Chrollo, but it would likely result in Gon and Killua being put in danger, and it's now clear that they mean much more to him than his revenge. This arc is about that balance, that contrast. The contradiction between Kurapika, the cold, calculated avenger, and Kurapika, the loyal, soft-hearted friend. Between the Phantom Troop as the monsters who slaughtered his clan, and the Phantom Troop as a grieving, deeply bonded family who would trade their lives for one another. And there's another contrast, another contradiction, a more meta example. The contrast between Hunter x Hunter had been before, and what it would soon become. The thing is, though, I can't even really suggest that this arc acted as a moment where a metaphorical baton was passed from the adventure JRPG styled arcs of before and the more grounded, complex plot lines of now, because what immediately followed this gritty mafia, morally gray neo-noir storyline was Gon and Killua getting isekai to what is essentially Yu-Gi-Oh! Meets Dragon Quest, where the main villain is some goober known as the Bomber. And he starts causing issues on September 11th, right after Gon and Killua leave New York. What did Togashi mean by this? Hell, the arc after that, despite maintaining a more gritty edge to its storyline, presented itself with a more lighter tone compared to Yorknew and the arc that preceded it, Chimera Ants, and the ones that have followed, particularly the Succession Contest arc. Going back to how I assess that people may define Hunter x Hunter by its large scope and scale storytelling, themes, deepness, darkness, whatever the hell, I think in truth what defines Hunter x Hunter goes a little deeper than that. This arc, more than anything, showed that Hunter x Hunter wasn't a series that could be defined by one singular tone or genre. It wasn't always going to be a fun adventure manga because some days it could be a revenge mafia story. Then it'd turn around and become a card game anime, a psychological thriller, a political thriller, and never at all does it feel like Hunter x Hunter is becoming something that it's not supposed to be. Yorknew changed Hunter x Hunter in the sense that it made it clear that this story was Togashi's playground, a story that didn't need to stay in one lane. A story that could be anything, but still distinctly Hunter x Hunter.